captions on the recorded version of this panel, which we'll be putting up on YouTube later on. So we have a group agreement for these 2 days to keep this event as safe and as welcoming as possible. Zoe has linked to this in the chat, and it's also on our AGM website. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, and remember to use all panelists and attendees, or everyone if you'd like to speak to everyone, and all panelists if you'd like to speak to someone from the NSUN team. If you have any questions for the panelists, please put them in the Q&A. And just to let you know, the session is being recorded and live streamed. It will be available on our website and our YouTube channel later on as well. If you're an attendee, your camera and sound are switched off and the chat will not be broadcast. If you're on Twitter, you can use the hashtag NSUNAGM2020 to share your thoughts. So without further ado, over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Akiko. I hope everybody can hear me. Let me know if you can't. But my name is Amy Wells and I'll be chairing this discussion. I use she, her pronouns, and I am NSUN's still fairly new communications and membership officer. I am a queer woman originally from the very glamorous town of Grimsby, you might know that, and I have lived experience of mental distress and trauma and various labels. I'm a fairly recent graduate and I have experience working in higher education student support settings and in students' unions. And now I use my lived experience working for a survivor-led network, which is NSUN, which has been a great journey so far. So today's discussion will be about an hour long, and we will be talking about the rather broad and rather abstract topic of youth mental health and lived experience leadership. And we are doing so at a time with one heck of a backdrop. So we obviously know that mental health issues can crop up at any time in someone's life. But we also know that they can be very much formed in your youth or shaped by traumas and inequalities experienced while we're growing up. And it's a very common experience for young people I've met and heard from, and from my own experience, that when you try to ask for help, you're often either too sick or not sick enough for our very stretched services. Right now, we're seeing headline after headline about how COVID-19 is affecting young people's mental health at a time when we are already getting a little bit of stick for being a snowflake generation. We have young people in casual employment who were a bit screwed over when the pandemic started, and it's no secret that we're in a pretty bad recession and stagnant job market at the moment. We also have young people in education, isolated and maybe not getting the experience they're paying for in the case of higher education, and we are seeing activism from them as a response, for example, in Manchester. We've also got this context of arguably the biggest social movement to happen with Black Lives Matter, engaging more young people than ever before, against a pretty horrible political backdrop that we often have no say in, with the average age of MPs being 50. And oh yeah, let's not forget that the natural world is slowly dying. I saw something the other day that said 1 in 6 kids experience eco-anxiety these days. But I think my small slither of hope is that I do believe in my generation, and I hope that in a decade, or maybe 2, people in power will have values more aligned with our own. So with that cheery introduction, I'm going to ask our amazing panelists to introduce themselves in turn, talk about their experiences, and we can then turn to the discussion and questions. So if you do have any questions that come up while people are speaking, feel free to type them in the Q&A section on Zoom if you're watching from within the webinar. So I'm really honoured to be joined in cyberspace by some absolutely fantastic people. So first up, I will go to Liv, if that's okay. Hi, Liv, if you want to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Liv, and I'm really excited to be on this panel. I guess I'll just quickly say a little bit about my experience and why I'm here. I'm currently a peer support coordinator for Hearts and Minds, which is a peer support group for people aged 14 to 25 with lived experience of mental health difficulties. And we're kind of just trying to create a peer network that cares for each other and has a focus around young people, their needs, desires, and support wants. I've been doing that since February, so it's been quite a wild ride, in that I think I did 2 weeks of my job IRL before COVID happened and Miss Rona put us all on Zoom. So it's been an interesting time to be working around support. Outside of that, I've been organising with various direct action groups probably for the last 7 years, doing things such as squatting buildings to open social centres with a focus around domestic violence and queer rights, as well as anti-fascist organising. I'm also part of the Outside Project team, which is an LGBTIQ homeless shelter and domestic violence refuge, and I was part of the team that opened the first ever LGBTIQ refuge this year in the UK. And I also am part of the Advocacy Academy team, which is a collective that educates and organises with young people, particularly in South East London, to empower them around creating direct action groups. And I supported recently a group called I See Free, which was a group of young Black teenagers in Lewisham who wanted to campaign against stop and search and eradicate stop and search. I'm also a committed abolitionist, so I hope in my lifetime to see the end of the police state, the prison state, and people being detained and all the other bad stuff. And I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Fab, thank you so much, Liv. That was great. You are a stellar organiser, so it's always great to hear about your work. And next up, if it's okay, if I could go to Denise, if you could switch your camera on and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Denise Brown, and I'm the founder of For Young Minds. So I actually did the Hearts and Minds peer support training earlier this year, which is how I was introduced to NSUN. But as the founder of For Young Minds, I spend my days delivering one-to-one mentoring and wellbeing workshops to young people aged 11 to 25 around the country, well, around London, and obviously with Miss Rona online on Zoom. But we also work with parents and teachers to provide that real wraparound support and intervention for young people. And yeah, I think I'll just say that for now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I thought I was still on mute, but I'm not. We love technology. Yeah, thanks so much. And then finally, last but not least, we've got Rosie here. If you could turn your camera on. There you are. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Rosie. I am the Chief Executive Officer at Student Minds, which is the UK student mental health charity. I'm also a trustee for the Mental Health Foundation under the mental health charity. So that's, I guess, what keeps me focused on a day-to-day basis. I grew up in Coventry. I now live in Leeds, and I came into this, I would say, as a campaigner at heart. So my first way into the issue of student mental health was through being a student union officer. And I had my own experiences of accessing mental health support. I think I'm really grateful to be taking part in this panel because I think NSUN really demonstrates the values I think we need in society. And I think, you know, everything you do to create an inclusive space is brilliant and really inspiring. A few things just to say really, I guess, about Student Minds. We very much grew out of students' own personal experiences with their mental health. Our first projects were bringing students together who wanted to provide peer support groups for fellow students experiencing challenges of eating difficulties, low mood, mild depression, and also students who had themselves had experiences of either bereavement or of trying to navigate university with a mental health condition, and so wanted to campaign about mental health. So that is still very much at our core. And today, although we've expanded the work we do, it's always trying to think about how do we keep that as a core value, that empowerment, that student leadership. So I can share some of those experiences, some of the things we've learned along the way throughout this panel. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosie. Thanks to everybody for introducing yourselves. So what we will do is I'll get started with the first question for the panel, and then I'm going to be keeping an eye on the Q&A and the chat to see if questions come through from people who are watching. So I was really struck just then by everybody kind of mentioned peer support and mutual aid. And I just wondered if anybody has any insights into why it is that they think peer support is so important for young people particularly, or I guess kind of have you faced any barriers trying to organise things that are around peer support and mutual aid for young people? Because obviously risk kind of pops into the equation quite a lot when we're talking about supporting young people. So I'd just be really interested to hear people's insights on how they found organising peer support spaces specifically for young people. So yeah, I guess I'll pass it over to my panelists. Anybody fancy going first? Just pop up and I will mute myself and go away.
Yeah, I can go first. I guess that when thinking about young people organising, particularly around mutual aid, I think firstly that one of the most amazing radical things about the generation of young people that we have now is that they're super politically aware, super informed, and they have like quite radical perspectives already. A lot of the young people I encounter know more about Marxism and anti-capitalism than I do. So there's not a lot of like convincing to be done. And the main kind of exchange seems to be around activist toolkits, as it were, passing down the kind of tricks of organising. I definitely think risk can be really, really difficult, particularly if you want to organise with young autonomous groups. I had a really interesting conversation with an autonomous mutual aid young persons group in Portland who were organising around the Black Lives Matter movement and distributing kind of food and healthcare and wealth in that area. And they said that it was really difficult because the more support and the more successful their reach was, the more adults tried to get involved and stick their nose in and say, like, where are your parents kind of thing. And they were just trying to do this really good radical movement. But I think like I'm 28 and I mostly work with people under that age. And I think that just empowering people to know that we respect them and their autonomy and their decision-making skills at a young age, and that a 14-year-old is completely capable of leading a revolution. Why wouldn't they be? I feel like that's a good starting point around these kind of themes.
I love that. Thank you so much. And Denise, hey, right, I'll shut up again.
Hi. Hi again, everyone. So, I mean, I think peer support is so important for young people, and a big focus of the workshops and work that I do with young people is encouraging that space where they're able to talk to each other. And I think the group workshops are more powerful than the one-to-ones, or even when they're coupled together, for that reason, because just the sharing of ideas makes young people realize just how much we all live very similar lives in terms of the things we struggle with, but people aren't addressing them or talking about them openly. So I didn't mention at the beginning, but I've got lived experience of anxiety. I actually developed anxiety when I was 14 years old. And I won't say how long ago that was, but there was not much happening in terms of people talking about mental health at the time. So I very much felt on my own with it. So I wanted to create an organization that very much focuses on getting young people to understand each other and talk more to each other. And I think peer support is important. You know, as Liv said, we've got young people who are really passionate about hopefully their futures and each other a lot more than previous generations. And I think we are having a more empathetic generation starting to develop. And for that reason, we need to be giving them the tools to work together and support each other, and not just be relying on guidance from the older generations forever. And I think there's something really powerful in letting them take ownership and really empowering them to take that real responsibility for their own well-being and for each other.
Yeah, I think what Liv and Denise just covered, agree with those points. I guess I'd just add perspective of when we were first getting peer support groups going in universities about a decade ago. I think things were in a slightly different place. So I know when colleagues of mine were starting to get those groups going, they probably had a lot more closed doors. There's probably a lot more nervousness around how could this work well, and a lot of questions around how are you setting up spaces that are always safe. And I think through probably the weight of a lot of students and staff and academics and, you know, lots of people working together, I think the case has very clearly been made that this is too important to not have peer-to-peer. I think there's so much we can now draw upon. There's so much research that's been done that shows that peer support can be incredibly effective, that people are often more likely to speak to their friends or peers before anyone else. So I think we've got the backing of that research behind us, but I do think when we started, we experienced something similar to, I guess, what your original question was getting at, Amy, that some of that nervousness, and I guess I can kind of understand why some of the practitioners that we've worked with over the years to begin with might have been a bit nervous around how we're going to do this. They if it's concepts and approaches that are new to them, if they've not had their own personal experience of accessing peer support. And I think we just had to work really hard to explain the value of it, really show the kind of training and support and supervision, things that we had in place around that. But I think, I think that there's the argument's changed in a way in the last decade. I think now it's just so clear that the only way we're really going to create a mental health system that works for people is to make sure that that peer-to-peer role is a really well supported part of the system.
Fab, thank you very much for that, Rosie, and everybody else. Totally agree with all of your points. We have got a couple of questions coming through, and there are two that sort of link together a little bit. So one from Mark asking, how do we make sure our autonomous spaces are safe for everyone? Any good tips? Or kind of alternatively, we've heard a lot this AGM about specific challenges around activism, the importance of care as kind of like resistance, creating spaces that are safe, nurturing and empowering for young people. And we know that spaces in, like, for example, student organising, student politics, sometimes aren't that harmonious as we might like to think that they are. So I guess either what do you think about making like safe spaces for young people, or how do you think we can make organising spaces more kind of healing and nurturing to be a part of, I guess. So I'll let you guys think over that for a good few seconds, and then if anybody wants to jump in, please do.
So I didn't really mention risk in the last thing I said, but I think where there's risk, I mean, you can have risk either way without making groups, as in if young people are sort of left to their own devices, there's risk there. But we know that there are obvious benefits of these peer support groups. So I think as long as things are done as much as possible to mitigate the risk, of course, there will always be things that you can't predict in those situations. But you know, things like having the group contract. I mean, I've been introduced to that a few times now, particularly with Hearts and Minds as well. When I did the training, it was one of the first things that we did as a group. You know, I didn't know anyone in that group, but knowing that once that agreement was made as a group, if anyone was to break that or move away from that, or, you know, to start bringing negative energy into that group, it would have been something that all of us would have picked up on because it was an agreement that was made at the beginning. So I think using group agreements are such a powerful way to try and set expectations at the beginning of what the group is meant to be. And anything away from that, hopefully, is picked up quite quickly by the rest of the group and supported.
Yeah, I think to pick up on that as well, like group agreements are really good. I'm not really into like the language of like a safe space. Something that we use at Advocacy Academy and I'm trying to use more elsewhere is the idea of a brave space. And the two sides of that are a space where you are brave enough to call out injustice when you see it and brave enough to listen when someone calls you out for something that you have done. And that for me feels like a really good working model, allowing space for kind of survivor-led justice, which I guess when we're talking about autonomy, we're thinking a lot about how everyone is able to hold their own identities and their own traumas in those spaces. So yeah, I feel like a braver space is a good place to start with that, and that kind of, as well, like survivor-led justice, a lot of that is around the idea of understanding that no one is disposable and that we understand that it's not as binary as a survivor and a perpetrator. And I think for me, when I think about kind of autonomous zones and like the history of them, a big thought is that like not everyone has to work with everyone. There will be people in your space who are really, really good at working with what we might call a perpetrator and understanding the background and histories of that. And there'll be people that are really good at working with people currently in their trauma and survivors. And I think it's understanding that not everyone has to be involved in every little in every moment. Like you can find the bits where you really thrive as an organizer or a supporter, and you can also understand that like maybe it isn't my role to hold that person's hand through that moment, and someone else will pick up on that. And I feel like that's when the autonomous spaces start to really thrive, when people start to kind of allocate and not have to be constantly involved in all of it. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it definitely did. I mean, I couldn't put what I want to say anywhere near as good as that, but just to add that I think a big part of this is around how we support people to keep developing their own kind of listening skills. And it's tricky, isn't it? Because you create sometimes a space where you're bringing together a lot of different people with different backgrounds, different ideas, and you want to make sure that everyone knows when to kind of step up and kind of say their piece, and when actually they might be dominating and to step back. And yeah, I'm sure we've all had experiences of being in different meetings, settings where that happens and where it doesn't. And I think whoever's facilitating has a really key role to play in that. So yeah, more work around, I think, the more we support us, I think, to think about how they're listening, things like group agreements, all of that can help. But I suppose all of us should remind ourselves that all of us are not, even if we think we're good at this, we are still create our own power dynamics, and you never really know, actually. It's not unless you invite people to give you feedback, whether you know, have I created a dynamic that's unhelpful? Have I made someone feel patronized? Have I spoken over someone else? I think, yeah, there's just a few middle thoughts really, but that was a really good question about how you create those supportive spaces in a campaigning setting. I think we've got more to do on that, Amy.
Yeah, agreed, Rosie. But thank you for sharing that, like that concept of a brave space rather than a safe space. I really like that. It sits quite well with me. So thank you for sharing that, Liv. We've got, yeah, quite a lot of questions coming through, and there's one that leads on from what we were just talking about quite well, I think, about how do we essentially manage the need for both passionate activist organising collectives and peer support where we can just support each other and breathe, I guess. And then another one that's very similar to that, if we're advocating peer support, then how can young people avoid burnout, especially with all the challenges to even basic needs being met right now, with financial crisis, housing, etc. So I guess, yeah, that leads on quite well from the discussion that we were just having. But if anybody has anything more specific to say about maybe youth activism and burnout, I definitely know a lot of young people who are in leadership positions who absolutely burn themselves out kind of for whatever cause it is they're involved in. So just, yeah, interested to hear any reflections on that.
So I'm not sure if I heard the first part of the question, so I might need reprompting on that, but I can say a few thoughts, I guess, around burnout. I think there's a few layers to this. I guess I would say I've learned quite a bit around this. I think I've had a few points in the last few years where I've definitely got to that stage of thinking I am actually going to burn out. And I think, yeah, you don't always, it's not until afterwards sometimes, is it, until you reflect and you look back and think I wasn't really operating at my best. I think a few things can make a difference. I think having people you really trust that you can talk to about the really difficult stuff, that you, yeah, a brave space, to borrow Liv's phrase, where you can really say, this has happened, or I'm just trying to work out what's going on here. People that are going to be in your corner and kind of give you that freedom to talk it through and challenge you if you need to be. So I think, yeah, finding some of those key people that you can trust, that you can be really open and honest with. And I think that's really important for everyone really, but for young people in leadership roles where you're sometimes trying to work out what's actually going on in a setting. So I've definitely had periods in my career so far where I've been thinking, I feel like something in this situation is not appropriate or right, but I can't work out if this is to do with, is that what's causing it? Is there like a gender element to it? Is it to do with like, is it an age difference and generational difference, where there might not actually be offence intended? Is it to do with, you know, the interests of communities that we're representing in the room? So I think, yeah, you need that space to talk those things through. I also think making sure that your own kind of self-worth isn't completely connected to the activism that you're doing, which is difficult when you're passionate. And this is why I'm so excited about this panel, because I think with the idea of lived experience leadership, you'll often be incredibly self-aware, incredibly compassionate to other people, all the things that actually you want to see in leaders, particularly right now. But I think it can be also easy to then feel kind of a lot of responsibility, and you know, you can feel like you're being exposed all the time to lots of challenging situations. So I think, yeah, you have to find things that you do that are not to just in the activism, which, yeah, just feel free to challenge me on that, other people. But I think finding other things, like I know if I don't go for walks, if I don't have some space where I like listen to music or something else, I will not switch off. So I think it's finding those things that help, really. It's my start off a 10 on that.
Oh, this is so funny, everyone popping up and down. Yeah, in terms of burnout, I have lots of feelings about this. This is something I think about a lot. In that I think my particular generation, or like certainly the direct action groups I grew up inside, we had really intense burnout culture. It was very, very like full steam ahead, do or die. And actually those are really ableist like ways to work. The whole time the revolution is going 1,000 miles an hour, it's leaving behind everyone that needs it the most. So it makes no sense to be moving so rapidly, and actually like learning to sit and wait and be patient, and so that everyone can feel like they're equally contributing to something important. That seems far more radical than one person working a 16-hour day and begrudging everyone else for wanting to go and have a walk and have a nice time. Also, it's not a revolution if you can't dance. It's not a revolution if you don't have fun. It's not a revolution if the food isn't good. There are so many things that make for joy, which is what we're all working towards. We're not working towards a life of horrible labor and long days. We're working towards peace and like joy inside ourselves and tenderness with each other. And the whole time we have a burnout culture, we're just replicating the state. We're just saying you need to work harder in order to gain these things, and that's not a good place to be in. And I see it a lot with older activists working with young people who are like, cool, let's do these huge crash courses. I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about feminism in a 2-hour session, and blow all these kids' minds, and not think that that's going to be this huge kind of big moment that should have been perhaps treated with more tenderness and gentleness. And I feel like those are words I associate very much with mutual aid and love and community. For me, that is a slow process, built on trust and generosity, and not just like rapidly storming ahead because one person's really good at doing this and so they're just going to go with it. And I've had to sit with that and learn that as well, like that just because I'm I can zoom ahead and do this. Everyone I've left behind is now no longer with me. And then what does that mean? What have I become in that moment?
Such amazing points so far, guys. I just wanted to add, I mean, there's not much more to say after that, but I just wanted to add that, yeah, exactly. There is no activism without the struggle that birthed it in the first place. So to completely just focus on, you know, the hard side of it, just literally, like Liv said, replicates exactly what you're trying to fight against. So I think it's necessary to fight that burnout culture, but it's also important to recognize that it is going to happen. I mean, challenging injustice, you know, being an activist is difficult. It is draining. That's why it's needed in the first place. But it doesn't mean that you should have to, you know, give up everything else in your life that you enjoy. Otherwise you will burn out. So it's about accepting and recognizing that sometimes it will get tiring, sometimes it will get difficult, but rather than, you know, begrudging yourself for acknowledging that and feeling guilty about resenting the cause, it's rather about giving yourself that time to de-stress, you know, like Rosie said, having that time for a walk and just being able to disconnect momentarily, because that is what keeps you being able to fight against the cause that you're fighting against.
Thank you so much for that, everyone. Really hear that, really resonate with a lot of what people were saying, and just finding that balance between maybe putting too much of yourself into something or too little. It's a very hard line to walk, and it's really like tied up with your own identity and the things that you've experienced yourself. So it's, yeah, not a straightforward question really at all. So there are a couple of questions about either education or young people outside of education. So I would just like to ask kind of another maybe or question to the panelists. Either kind of what is your maybe vision for something that needs to change in our education system to enable positive mental well-being for young people? Or on the flip side, a lot of conversation around young people focuses on students and people in education. Obviously, not all young people are in education. So as Ames said in the Q&A, kind of, do you have any experiences of supporting young people who aren't students? What can be done to support outreach for young people outside of the student community, where we've already got kind of like a ready-made organising space? And how might organisations like NSUN kind of support that? So bit of a rambly question, and hopefully, yeah, you can either speak to sort of the education side of things or young people outside of education, or both. So can I come to Rosie first, if that's okay? Sorry to put you on the spot, Rosie, but I'm interested in your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think in terms of support in education, I think we as a charity, Student Minds, we've been on a bit of a journey with this. So actually one of the ways we have tried to answer this question has been through what I would see as being a very thorough co-production process. So we spent the last couple of years developing something called the University Mental Health Charter. And what it seeks to be is a framework for what all universities should be doing to create a culture where everyone in that community can thrive, can succeed, can access support when they need it. So to do that, we went all around the country. We had loads of workshops, focus groups with a range of students, staff, practitioners. It was trying to really bring together all these different voices and come behind a shared understanding of what needs to change. So actually getting the shared language about what needs to change, shared solutions. So with that, it sets out all these different parts. It talks about how we actually learn, and actually how you design curriculum plays a crucial role in mental health and wellbeing for students and for staff as well. We talk about where you live. So actually, if you know, and can you afford to live, and all the other things that are in that kind of environment around you, green space, all those parts. It talks about staff wellbeing, recognizing that we're a community. You cannot support students unless you support staff. And then it has loads of recommendations around support. So thinking about what does really well-resourced, effective support look like for students, and that could be a range of different types of support, recognizing that different things work for different people. So I think for us, our answer to the question of what needs to change in education is we think we need to see all education institutions creating a whole university or whole school approach to mental health and well-being, where mental health and well-being goes through all the decision making, you know, and you know, we can use COVID as an example where you know, I think university colleges have worked incredibly hard this year to try and support students the best they can, but you can see clear points along the way where you think, where in that decision making did someone ask, what impact is this going to have on the mental health and well-being of our community? So yes, that's quite a big one really, is trying to encourage all education environments to really work on that culture, work on those root causes that we know are contributing to increased pressures on young people. I think in terms of wider than that, there's loads of stuff, but I think the other panelists will speak to it better than I will. But all the other things we know that matter to this generation, climate change has clearly got to be a key priority. I think the activism we've seen this year around support and injustice for racialized and minoritized communities, sexual violence, like there's so many different topics that this generation just gets it and just knows what needs to shift in wider society. So I guess I hope that all of us can make improvements both in the education setting and then tackle what these wider factors as well. That's my start on that. It's a big one, isn't it, Amy, that one?
So I had my blanket up there, it's a bit chilly in my room. Yeah, I just really wanted to echo that point that Rosie made, that you can't support students without supporting staff. And I think it's so key that we can't ignore that teachers and young people, there is that gap in terms of their different generations, and teachers aren't automatically going to know how to support young people you know, with different and new and upcoming issues that they're all facing if teachers aren't constantly being upskilled and trained in those areas. So, I mean, just to give an example, so earlier Amy mentioned that, you know, the BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter movement has been very prominent this year as we saw it coming more to the forefront, you know, at the beginning of lockdown. And, you know, as a youth worker, it's about constantly trying to think, well, how can I support this now? Because young people, firstly, haven't been in school for months due to the lockdown and COVID, but they're going to go back to school, potentially not not having had anywhere to process or even understand these emotions that will have come up as a result. Now, whether that's a young person from a Black or minority background, or even just their friends who are now trying to understand this, it is a big topic. And you know, teachers are now only starting to learn more and become allies to this kind of situation. So without any kind of training, how is that going to be something that can be openly discussed in a classroom if that isn't something that's constantly being added to the teacher's CPD, the training that they need to take? So a big part of what For Young Minds does is creating these, you know, innovative trainings that do address a lot of the issues that young people are facing outside of school, because these problems are being brought into school. And just to touch on, you know, young people that aren't in education, we have to remember that a large part of why young people drop out of school in the first place is because, you know, their mental health hasn't been adequately supported, or, you know, other issues. If we're talking about, I mean, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole with the discrepancies between, you know, race and exclusion, but if race is a barrier in education and teachers aren't being trained around that, that's going to continue to happen, and we'll be seeing more and more young people out of education.
Yeah, I guess just to like follow on from some of those thoughts. Firstly, a lot of the young people that I've been organising with over the last year, we talk a lot about the Peru to prison pipeline, which I can never say. Pupil referral unit to prison pipeline, which is this classic, extremely classist, extremely racialized journey that a lot of young people go on where they are targeted by teachers because of the color of their skin or because of what their parents' jobs are, how they talk in class, because they have behavioral difficulties. They're treated as difficult people. They find themselves in pupil referral units, which has such a high statistic of young people that come out of that and fall straight into crime because it's kind of what's expected of them. And it makes me really, really upset and really angry to see the way that young people are criminalized by teachers and how quickly a teacher, not all, I'm sure there's good teachers out there, but how like a huge amount of teachers fall really quickly into being cops, into becoming police on campus. And also, like, looking at the moment in terms of mental health in COVID, there's uni students in Manchester who are literally fenced in, locked in with police on their campus, preventing them from leaving their rooms, which is such a distressing and disturbing thought. When I was at Goldsmiths, I graduated in 2015, and in 2013 we occupied Deptford Town Hall, which again happened last year as part of the anti-racist Goldsmiths movement. But when we occupied, a lot of our occupation demands were to do with the waiting list for mental health support. We had people committing suicide in halls in the first 2 months that they were leaving, because they were leaving homes, coming from places where they felt really supported, to being completely isolated in halls with strangers. So we had high suicide attempts, high suicide rates, and a 6-month waiting list for mental health support. So I think that the way the institution handles mental health is that it is a deep convenience, and if it's not convenience, it's something to be criminalized and to be and something that allows us to write off young people that are working class, that are queer, that are trans, that are black, that are brown, and that really, really disturbs me. And I don't think that I don't think that there can ever be enough conversation around those ideas. So I'm glad that it got brought up.
Thank you so much. My brain is literally so full of all of your amazing contributions. And it's super interesting to hear all of your insights. And yeah, that is a big question. So thank you very much. In terms of, it might not be that everybody has an answer for this one, but just picking up on a question from Angela in the chat. I'm keen to hear views on how different or not different the brave spaces need to be for different age groups of young people. Is it different for a 14-year-old as opposed to a 21-year-old? So I guess this is like, yeah, people might not have experience with that, but if you do, please do feel free to offer any thoughts about what might be different in those spaces between younger young people and older young people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, shall I speak a bit about that? Yeah, I guess like with a braver space, the idea is that like the idea is that we're not, I think the difference, the main difference I want to point out from a safe space to a braver space is a safe space is promising something that we don't have. A safe space is, for me, is promising this utopia. You can come to my safe space with all these people that are like you and we won't be harmed. And that isn't what happens. That isn't what happens in organizing spaces or in peer support spaces. There is still harm that takes place there. So the braver space is a commitment to hold each other through the harm, to understand the roots of the harm, and to not exile people from communities that they need because that person is being harmful. In order for it to work, it has to be survivor-led. And I think sometimes if the survivor is like, that person can't be in my space, that's a really difficult thing. But I think, you know, it's very nuanced. In terms of age range, I would say that allowing young people to write their own kind of guides for the space is a really good place to start. It can be really difficult organizing over that kind of 16 and 18 and 21, those lines, when you have the cross-generational groups. It's really, really difficult. And I think it's just about constantly having conversations with people and also understanding that sometimes a young person perhaps won't understand the implications of their actions or their language. And the way for me to try and work around that is not to tell someone they've done something wrong, but to understand where those perspectives are coming from. Like, I've worked with young people who perhaps, like, you know, have come from like kind of got boisterous older brothers and speak in really sexual manners, and actually instead of being like, you're a 17-year-old, you can't speak like that here, it's like, why are you bringing that energy to this space when that isn't what the space is for? What's happening there? How do I get to the root of that? Do you understand that when you say those things, you make you make other people that I know you care about feel uncomfortable. And also understanding that some like young people are trying to find themselves and trying to find their identity. So that means they're going to make loads of mistakes. I'm 28. I'm still getting face tattoos and making mistakes every weekend. So it's like holding space for that mistake and understanding that those things are learning curves if we handle them like with the right amount of softness. I don't know if I answered your question or went on a rant, but those are my thoughts.
I think you did answer the question. Denise, do you want to quickly come in? Lovely.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. I mean, only speaking as someone who does workshops for, you know, young people in schools and, you know, younger ones, 14-year-olds, and then also doing workshops for over 18s. I don't think it's that the support needs to be particularly different, because at the end of the day, that 14-year-old is eventually going to be 18 plus as well. It's about teaching the tools regardless of your age. And obviously it's just about maybe altering and tailoring the content and the things that you talk about in these sessions for that age group. I mean, I don't necessarily think, I'm sort of going off on a tangent here, but like, for example, the fact that support is like traditionally stops at 18 for a lot of young people really doesn't make sense, because I feel like when you turn 18, that's when the help is really needed and things get even more confusing. So I think, you know, at 14, that's the time when young people can really start to struggle with their mental health. We already know that 50% of mental health conditions will develop by 14. And that doesn't mean that they need less or more, well, I guess you could say they need more support, but it doesn't mean that someone who's 21 plus needs less because they're older. I just think it's about working and co-designing with the groups that you're working with and really just trying to tailor to what works for them.
I'm muted. Thank you, I meant to say. And hi, Rosie, do you have anything to add?
Just briefly, I mean, for us as a charity, we only work with students really on that transition into higher education. So I can't really speak to the younger age group. I guess what I wanted to highlight is that peer support, I mean, it can mean so many different things. So for us, a lot of peer support is around the fact that people are students. You know, they might have very little else in common, but there is some thread of shared experience at that time. But I know that, you know, can then create spaces where some people think, actually, no, it's not for me. And we've been involved with some work to develop specific support for, say, postgraduate students, some work around a podcast for men, recognizing some of the differences that can be there, not always, but around stigma based around gender and experience. So yeah, I think that near to peer can also be effective. So some of the best learning I've had in a group setting has been from people who have, you know, are a few years perhaps ahead of me, but they're near enough to, you know, still have the compassion and understanding. So yeah, just, I guess, obviously there's a lot of safeguarding stuff to consider when you're mixing ages, and that's really important. But I think there is value in near to peer as well. And yeah, how we create that. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
It does. Thank you very much. Thanks for all of your reflections around that question, everyone. I know that these are all like quite open-ended, broad questions, and we're obviously not going to solve all of the issues surrounding young people's mental health in a 1-hour panel, but it is so interesting to hear all of your insights. So we're heading towards the end now. We've got 10 minutes left. So what I would like to do is invite the panelists to say anything that they want to say to finish off. You know, is there anything that you want to particularly kind of reiterate, or alternatively, kind of considering this backdrop that we're in with the pandemic, with climate change, with all of these issues that are weighing on young people, what do you think we need to overcome barriers to young people actually taking up positions of power and leadership that we've seen that they can do so well in organising spaces, youth action and all of that good stuff? So I guess just, yeah, final kind of reflections on the very broad topic, and if there is anything that you think we can do to overcome barriers to young people getting involved in even things like charity trusteeship. Like the average age of a trustee is, I don't actually know what the average age is, but I know that it's definitely not a young age. So yeah, I guess I'm just really interested in those closing reflections from everyone. And I don't know who wants to go first.
My reflection is, and I feel I have to do this myself a lot, when working with young people, when we feel like we're holding back, I think a good question we can ask ourselves is what we're afraid of. What's the fear that comes from the idea of allowing a young person to be autonomous? And often I think when we ask ourselves that, what we might find is that we think that we as young people might have made different decisions. I think I've come up through I have a lot of lived experience quite young of drug use and addiction and kind of quite, I don't know, reckless behavior, as young punks often do, and squatting and all that kind of stuff. And so sometimes my fear of wanting to kind of make decisions on behalf of a young person comes from the decisions that I have made for myself before, and trying to really kind of let go of that and stop predicting people's journeys, actions, decisions, I think is when working with young people can really be its most powerful. In terms of getting young people into boards and stuff, I think there's so much work to be done around that. How do we make it something that feels rewarding and alluring, but also isn't demanding on someone who's in forced education? So I'm not sure I have the answers to that. But yeah, my reflection around working with young people is kind of like, allow your lived experience allow your lived experience to be an informative tool, but don't allow it to write off someone else's possibilities and journeys.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the fact that more people are realizing that you don't have to be, you know, an expert with loads of masters and PhDs in a topic to be knowledgeable about it. Lived experience is so powerful. And I think as more people are starting to realize that you can still make a difference just through the conversations that you're having with others, it will start to grow. And I think that representation of when you see people your age, you know, your race, people that look like you, in these spaces, it makes it more accessible for more young people to jump on board and start doing it themselves. But just in terms of how, you know, working with young people directly, I mean, a big part of what For Young Minds is about is that when I'm delivering these workshops and the one-to-one mentoring, I don't sugarcoat. I think it's important to remember that young people that we're working with and we're trying to support are at an age that they want autonomy, they want to make decisions for themselves. And we've seen time and time again that telling young people what to do doesn't work. It often makes them go the other way. So it's more about giving them the information and then trying to help them to make more informed decisions. So when I speak to young people in a workshop, if they're having like, I mean, a conversation that's inappropriate, rather than just being like, oh, can we stop that? It's about actually saying, okay, let's talk about that in this room. So if you leave them to go and talk about it on the playground, they're only going to keep talking about it anyway, but you can potentially be that person in that moment to give them information that helps them to think differently or, you know, more proactively about something. So I think it's just about making sure that we, in those spaces, when we have got the tools to be able to have those conversations with young people, talk to them like, you know, young adults, because at the end of the day, they're seeing all the same things that we're seeing. They've got social media in the same way that we do now. They are more exposed to more things much earlier. And I think if you're in a position to be able to have those conversations, that helps them to make more informed decisions and, you know, have better media literacy, etc. It goes on and on. I think that will be really powerful and empowers them to actually make decisions. And of course, some of them will make mistakes. That's not the point. I think you learn from mistakes, but at least they've got sort of the intelligence behind it to help them to move forward from it.
Yeah, I really love those messages. And I think that point about not making assumptions and really suspending your judgment of other people, again, even though we know that how damaging that can be, we can all still find ourselves doing it from time to time. So yeah, I think that's just a good message to take into those environments. The point about trustees, I think, is a really interesting one. I I think we can learn a lot actually from things like student unions there, because they elect students into leadership roles, and at the age of, like, again, it can be a wide range of ages. That's really important to, you know, keep saying. But you will often have a group of people who are, you know, in their early 20s, who are making all the big decisions about that organisation of really major charities. So I think there's a lot we could learn from looking at how student unions do that well. The training and support that's put in place for people that are stepping into a leadership role. I think I know there's some really good schemes out there actually to support people that are interested in trusteeships. We'll perhaps have to share some links off the back of this. I think it takes applying and being rejected. I think most people that are trustees, myself included, have applied for various things and been rejected. And I think it's a real shame that a lot of I think a lot of charities are still learning why it matters to have diversity of all types on a board, that you want to have such a broad range of voices in the room in your decision making. I mean, the cases there, again, all the most effective, most successful organizations, groups, whatever we want to call them, are often incredibly diverse. And I say this, you know, recognizing that our charity has made improvements, but still got a long way to go there. Really excited. We've got we've just been through our latest recruitment for some student trustees, and I think you have to really challenge probably a board to with that question that Liv said, why do you not want people in the room, and really look at the reality of that answer. And it often is actually that these new voices will probably push us to do better. And if that's the answer, then you know the work you've got to do. And on that note, I'll start rambling.
Not a ramble at all. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. We are in our final 3 minutes now. That went so quickly. And just like on a personal note, I love sharing these kinds of spaces. They really energize me and give me hope for the future. So a huge thank you to the panelists for joining us today. Huge thank you to everybody who is watching as well. You can still leave comments and things in the chat, or if you're on Twitter, you can use the hashtag NSUN AGM 2020 if you have anything to say following up from this session. Also a thank you to Mind, because this panel was made possible because of a joint piece of work we're doing exploring this really, really abstract topic of lived experience leadership. I will post a quick link to that in the chat if anybody's interested in looking at it. Beth also mentioned in the chat something called Getting on Board, which I've not heard about, but it apparently does some cool stuff on young people and getting underrepresented groups being trustees. And I know that there's something else called the Young Trustees Movement as well that might be worth looking at. Again, I think it's just about like creating these networks and spaces for ourselves where we can lift each other up and inspire each other, and just like keep going, re-energize each other. So yeah, that was really fantastic. I will stop rambling now because we're in our final minute. But just a huge thank you again to everybody who's tuned in, everybody who's watching after the fact. And yeah, thank you. And I hope you enjoyed it.